Growing Great Kids. I just love this title. To grow is to nurture, to fertilize, to cultivate, and to be great. What does it mean to be a great child? It means that they're true, they're talented citizens. They're talented in their family, in their school, in their community, and they are the future leaders of our world. We want great kids in their own right. And they're kids. They're vibrant, they're enthusiastic, and they're creative, unique people. So that's who we are and what we want to do as parents and as educators, is to grow these wonderful people and just nurture that life. The last time we met, the first question that I asked you was, how are you feeling today? So again, let's just quickly reflect. What's your thought pattern or your feeling right now? Maybe anxious, maybe happy, maybe there's some sadness going on in your life. There's just the feelings that we have right now they generate our thinking. They generate what we think about and how we think. So I think it's always important to remind ourselves to reflect on, how am I feeling right now? Because that is going to project one way or another in my life, how I'm learning, if I'm learning, etc. So it determines us. It determines whether or not we're thriving, surviving, or maybe taking a dive. Teaching children and adults about social emotional learning is to teach them to learn with these emotions. Not put them aside, not to pretend that they're not there, but to live with them and to learn with them. So that was our focus in the last episode. Let's go to the, our agenda for today is to look at how do we identify the thinking process, because the social emotional process is in our limbic system of our brain. It's in the middle of our brain. It's our emotional system. Our disposition starts there, and then we go into, well, how do I learn? How do I think? What's my personality like? What are my learning modalities? What are my intelligences? So we go from this social emotional to the actual disposition of learning, and that's why we're covering that today. And let's go ahead to the next slide. So our agenda there. So just a quick review from our last episode. I hope you remember some of the visual kinesthetic ways that we expressed the brain and how we learn and how that affects social emotional learning. So the first thing that we talked about was educate. What does it mean to educate? How do we draw out? If you remember, the definition of the word educate is to draw out. It's not to fill in. And unfortunately, we've said that for too long in education. We think we're supposed to fill in kids' minds with 3,500 standards. No, it's drawing out. Who is that child? Today, we're going to understand a much better, more clear way to understand who a child is. How do they think? What are their modalities, intelligences, and temperament? So that was education. Then we talked about the brain basics. So if you can remember, and maybe you've read this somewhere or seen this in some graphics, but I think it's a perfect example of our brain. So if you put your thumb in, your fingers over, that's a great description of your brain. Your brain stem, which is your survival brain, your limbic system, and your cerebrum, which is your 4 lobes of your brain. I personally like to think about heart, mind, body, and soul, because that's the whole person, or the whole brain is thinking about, how am I thinking about my relationships with people, my physical well-being, my intellectual well-being, and my spiritual well-being. So that's heart, mind, body, and soul. Very good. So and then the last thing is we did the neuron, and I showed you a cool little example of how to create a neuron for kids to understand the cell body, the dendrites, the axon, the myelin sheath, and the synaptic connections. And that we have 100 billion neurons in our head, 100 billion that can connect to up to 10,000 other neurons. So it's just a phenomenal computer, if you will, or organic computer that we have in our head, and which I think the main point to me is that, my gosh, my kids are unique and they're so capable. 100 billion neurons, we're so capable of learning. We just have to nurture that. We have to nurture a positive attitude about learning, and that's what disposition is. Let's go to the next slide and talk briefly about the formation of learning and how we learn. So the next, keep going one more. We want to look at the actual formation. There we go. So I introduced this briefly, but if we think about learning and the process, how do we get from just wanting to learn to being a super creative decision maker, problem solver, inventor, etc. How do we get from disposition to creativity? And if we start here, we establish a healthy attitude, we establish a healthy mindset about learning. So disposition has everything to do with what we're talking about today when we look at modalities, temperament, and intelligences. That is our disposition. I'll explain that a little further in a minute. And then secondly, we want kids to acquire knowledge. So how am I going to acquire knowledge with the particular disposition that I have? So this goes first. This drives the acquisition of knowledge. Once I've acquired new knowledge, then I need to take that knowledge, I need to connect those neurons and do some reasoning work. Seeing my camera upside down, there we go. The reasoning, which is extending and refining the knowledge. When I do that, I get 50% retention. If I just did this, the knowledge part of it, I only get a 10% retention. So we got to get kids through a reasoning process with that new knowledge. And then finally, as I said earlier, creativity. We want kids to be creative. We want them to make good decisions and solve problems, invent, investigate, experiment, and do systems analysis. So this is the model that I keep addressing as we're going through this. And today's episode is about this element. I'd love to do some more work with us regarding the other elements of this framework, but disposition is foundational. Without a disposition to learn, you don't get very far. You create a reluctant learner at times. And we can generate disposition. We can nurture that. We can grow it. We can fertilize a child's disposition. So that's what I'm here to share with you today, how we do that. So let's go a little bit further into that process. And I think in my thinking, in my career, I've narrowed it down to these three terms, to these three ideas. And if we do these three things in this order, as a parent or as an educator, we will affect, we will grow a great child. And they are affirm, stretch, and celebrate. Simply said, how do I affirm a child for their strengths and their struggles? Affirmation is so essential. I'll just, case in point, listening to Lynn this morning as we're getting ready for the webinar, just the affirming coaching that she gave me helps me to do a better job today in this webinar. When we get our kids up in the morning, if we're grouchy at them, what's their disposition going to be like? And when a child walks into a classroom, if the teacher's there shaking their hand and giving them a smile and saying, welcome, good morning, I'm so glad you're here, you're affirming the child. When you say, hey, awesome, you got it, and happy face on a piece of paper, or a high five, that affirmation is so powerful. Equally important in affirmation is to affirm our struggles, to appreciate that I'm not perfect, that I make mistakes. And I almost believe that the affirmation of our struggles is maybe more powerful than the affirmation of our strengths, because it creates trust. And when we trust each other, when children trust us, they're open to learning and they're open to stretching. So affirmations of our strengths is critical. Affirmation of our struggles is love. It's appreciating who we are as unique people that aren't perfect. And once we do that, then we can stretch them in almost any direction because they trust us. They trust that we can drag them along, take them along, hold their hand, and help them to learn something new. And then finally, you gotta celebrate. And one of my favorite, speakers, authors is Tim Knold, and he had the cutest thing he said when he was presenting this idea once. He said, we've got to celebrate, we've got to have cake. You've got to have that affirmation, that high five, that celebration of success. And if we do that and we rotate through that periodically, so we affirm a child, stretch them a bit, high five for the stretch, then we affirm again, and we rotate through those 3 ideas, then we'll grow great kids. As a matter of fact, if you switch to the next slide, this is the mission statement of our school. We're using the Growing Great Kids title as our mission statement, and we affirm kids, their strengths and their struggles. We affirm them for those things, to be terrific citizens. And if you're familiar with the character count system, terrific stands for they're trustworthy, they're respectful, responsible, fair, and caring. And then we stretch them to be with positive and productive habits of mind. Our third webinar actually is going to be a discussion and activities about how do we teach habits of mind? How do we generate that intellectual and personal character trait to help a child be smart? And then finally, celebrate the awakening of creativity. So there we go. That's kind of where we've been and why we're here today. Let's dive in now into disposition, what it means, and how we can grow great kids with a positive disposition. We can develop that disposition. So let me start with a little exercise. And I want everybody doing this. Now, I can see all your cameras. No, I can't. But please clasp your hands together as I am. Just a natural clasp. And then I want you to look at your thumb and which thumb is on top. It's your left or your right. Some people do it like that, but you still have an interlocking that allows your left or right thumb to be on top. And I've done this probably hundreds of times now, and whether I'm in a group of 4 or 5 people or groups of hundreds or many hundreds, it's half and half. Half of us right now are clasping our hands with our left thumb on top, the other half with the right thumb on top. So what does that mean? Nothing. And not to be too silly, but it really doesn't mean anything. You did this for the first time in your mother's womb. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you a picture of a baby that actually has its hands clasped while it's in its mother's womb. We flip to that one, Lynn? There it is. So we did that in our mother's womb. I like that quote, we were knitted in our mother's womb. So let's go back to this slide, or go forward one, and we can talk about or look at, so what does this mean? What does this clasping of our hands mean? Well, take them apart, put them back together the opposite way. When you put your hands back together the opposite way, it probably feels awkward, goofy, weird, uncomfortable. Those are typically the words that we hear. It just doesn't fit right. Well, our disposition to learn is the way it feels right. When I feel good about how I'm learning, how I'm doing something, then my disposition gets stronger. If I'm told, do it this way, and I don't think it works, and I'm told, well, you're doing it wrong, then maybe I'm not smart. Maybe, boy, they're doing it that way and they're happy and they're learning, but I'm doing it another way, and now I don't think I'm smart. I think this is a great way to sum up this idea of disposition. Do I think I'm smart, or do I think I'm awkward? And that creates a reluctant learner. When we think we are awkward, we create reluctancy to thrive. We're not affirmed. It's the opposite of affirmation. So what do I believe about my ability to learn, my ability to do my job, my ability to be a parent, to achieve my dreams, to be the better version of myself? That is our disposition. It's the discovery, the awareness, and the creative use of my personal and unique strengths and talents. It's my inclination to want to learn is my disposition. And half of the puzzle is who I am as a unique learner. And the other half of the puzzle, with our brain thinking, is how we are being educated by our teachers and our parents, if they are encouraging this unique learner. All right, let's go to the next slide to just define disposition a little bit deeper. And if we were to list the elements of disposition, that's what you see in front of you now. Those elements we're pretty familiar with in the education world. For parents, maybe These are some edubabble terms like modalities. What are learning modalities? But that's whether I'm visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Naturally, you're about to discover what your strength is here in a minute. And then what's my personality? What's my temperament? You know, am I a concrete sequential person? Am I an ENFJ? There are lots of different personality sorters out there. But how does that dictate and drive my disposition? As well, my intelligences. We know there are many intelligences, not just one or two that the IQ test measures, but we can say, or Howard Gardner has taught us, that there are at least 8 different intelligences. So we'll look at our intelligences today, and how do we measure those and help a student to understand how they're smart. Disposition also includes that climate of the classroom. I talked about, you know, if a teacher's standing at the door and greeting kids when they walk in and saying, hello, how are you? How's your new dog? You know, how was the game yesterday? Congratulations on the work you did yesterday. It was wonderful. You know, just all of those simple climate changers will change a child's disposition to learn. They'll want to be at school. They'll want to be in the classroom. And if they want to be there, you have a much better chance of getting them to learn. The next element is tasks. If we give children tasks at their ability level or slightly above, their disposition gets stronger. When you give a child an operation or an activity or something to read that is at or above where they are right now, not too far above, they're going to learn, they're going to feel strong, the synapses are going to fire, the chemical neurotransmitters are going to ooze out of their synaptic terminals, and they're going to feel good about learning. Their emotional health is going to be stronger because they love what's happening to them. They're learning. Now, contrarily, if I give a child something way too easy, this is boring. This is dumb. I don't want to learn this. I already learned it. Or if you give them something way too hard, then their disposition is going to be that maybe I'm not smart, and we lose them. So disposition is very controlled by the tasks that we give children. That's why we spend so much time now in education trying to understand how to differentiate instruction for different kinds of learners, different levels of learners, so that they can all be engaged and get that dispositional, their attitude and perception about learning stronger. Finally, is habits of mind. And we're going to go into this in the next webinar quite deeply. But the habits of mind, I like to think of them as my intellectual and personal character traits. Do I find humor? That's a habit of mind. Do I restrain my impulsivity? Do I think interdependently? Those types of things are really what make us smart. When we practice and we habituate certain habits of mind, we get smarter, because we're using the thinking skills necessary to acquire knowledge, develop reasoning skills, and be creative. So those are the elements of disposition. Today we're going to cover modalities, personality, and intelligences, and I'm going to ask you to take a little survey with me and quiz with me. Let's see if we can find out exactly what yours are, if you don't know them already. But these are simple things you can do at home or at school to help children understand what their modalities, temperament, and personality are. Ready? So one of the things I don't know if I said, but maybe I did. Disposition is your attitude and your perception about learning and who you are as a learner. So our attitudes can change because we can influence them. When we talked about social emotional learning, if you just kneel down next to a child and look at them in the eye, you're going to change their disposition. They're going to trust you more. You're affirming them. So we have a lot of control over disposition, and we can help a child change that disposition on a dime. Sometimes it's very difficult when kids are really wrangling something in their head, but most of the time we have a lot of power as parents and teachers to change children's disposition.
Absolutely. Bob, I have a question for you.
Yes.
And this is a great question. Someone is wondering here if there's a kid-friendly term for disposition. How would you explain this to a child?
Yeah, you know what? I have thought about that many times, because there's a lot of language in our pedagogy that is too edubabble-ish, but my kids have learned it. Our kindergartners use the word disposition. We just have to teach it to them. It's not a simple word to learn, but once they do, they get it. They understand the concept usually better than adults do. So I would teach it to them. I would not hesitate to teach a child this language. Your disposition, and you can use that phrase, your attitude and perception about learning. Yeah, go for it. If you come up with a different one, let me know. But I don't hesitate. I really like teaching kids academic language. It makes them feel smarter. They feel smart when they use those big words. And when they understand the concept, they've got it, and they've got it for a lifetime. Why wait? So there's my answer to that. I hope that helps.
I like it. Thank you.
All right, you're ready to do your first little exercise. I call this Eye-dentifying learning styles. And I'm going to ask you at least 3 questions. So let me ask the first 3 questions, and I'll maybe add 2 more. But these questions are long-term memory questions. And I believe that just about every single one of us could come up with the answer given time. You might get it immediately, but given time, you could probably come up with this answer. But you've got to look. You've got to look in your brain. If you say, I don't remember that, no fair. You've got to try to look in your brain. So the first question I have for you is, who was your 2nd grade teacher? Think for a moment. Need the Jeopardy timer going. Now, okay, good. That's your first one. Whether you got the answer or not, I wanted you to think and look back in your brain. Second question. What was your favorite gift on your last birthday? Think, think, think. Back to your last birthday. Hopefully it wasn't yesterday. That would be easy. And the last question. What did you eat for lunch last Monday? A few days ago. Try to go back. And what did you eat? Now, when I asked those questions, your eyes moved. Your eyes either looked up to try to find the answer, they may have looked down, or they may have looked to the side. When we go to long-term memory, our eyeball moves. It will go in one of those 3 directions. So let me ask you 2 more questions. Now, try to see if your eyes are going to do the same thing, if they're going up, down, or to the side. So how about, what color shirt were you wearing on Monday? And one more question. What was the name of the street that you learned to ride a bicycle on? All right. So hopefully you have a sense of what direction your eyes moved. And oftentimes we have a dominant. We look up, like I'm a visual learner, I look up to the right and I try to find my memory. If I don't find it there, I'll tell myself, force myself to look down or to the side, because when I do that, I'm actually looking in different lobes of our brain. We're checking different lobes for the memories. So let's look at a picture of the eyeball here, and let's chop it up between visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So eye movement is going to, and it gives us about a 95% validity as to our primary learning modality. We all learn in multiple modalities, but our primary modality is our learning modality. So if we look up, go ahead and click the slides forward, then we are dominant visual learners. Then we are trying to find pictures and memories, images. We look to the side, we have a dominant auditory memory. And if we look down, we have a dominant kinesthetic memory. Now, a couple things. Some of us are dominant, like I'm always going to look up first, almost always. Some of us will look up, down, to the side. You're scanning your brain. You're trying to find, where did I put it? I don't see it. Oh, that's what I heard, or this is what I did. And that will be a very good indicator of our learning modality. Let's look at the inside of the brain and see what's going on there. So our brain has 4 lobes. You can see the occipital, the parietal, the temporal, and the frontal lobes, those 4 colors. And from our eyeball, we have the optic nerve. Go ahead and click the slide. That optic nerve connects to the middle of the brain, hits the hippocampus area, and the hippocampus says, where did I put it? Where did I put that long-term memory? And it's going to go look. If I look in the back of my brain, I'm going to hit the visual. If I look at the top of my brain, I'm going to hit the physical. If I look to the side, I'm hitting the temporal lobe, which is the auditory. So those three lobes there describe where we're storing that type of memory. Our brains do use those parts of our brain to store different types of long-term memory. And then finally, the frontal lobe is where we do logic and reasoning. So watching eye movement in a child or asking a child a long-term memory question can give you a clue as to how they're learning. Powerful, simple way to understand. And you can then use that to question them in a way that'll help them to learn something. Get it, got it, good? So that's eye movement, and that's a simple way. It's also called neuro-linguistic programming. If you're curious, you can look that one up, and they use that to do the therapy of neuro-linguistic programming. All right, moving forward, if there's a question there, let me know, but the next thing we want to look at is temperament or personality. Temperament's kind of a big word too, but we think I have a temper. Well, yeah, we all have a temper. Where does it come from? It comes from my personality or my temperament. And our temperament gives us a really strong clue as to how we think. What are our thinking styles? What kind of questions do I ask? So we're using this title of my favorite questions. My favorite question is who, and then why, and then what and when, and then where and how. And that's the order that I think. So I'm going to show you a tool that we use here at the school. There are many kinds of tools out there to understand temperament, but this is one that we've developed for kids, as well as teens and adults. So we have 3 different sets. So if you go ahead and go to the next slide, these are 4 color cards: heart, mind, body, and soul. It's a description of our whole person, our whole temperament. We are human beings of heart, mind, body, and soul. Not just mind, as school might want to think sometimes. We are holistic people. So these are the 4 cards that we use to describe our temperament. And it's a real simple survey. Each card has some pictures on it and some vocabulary to describe the soul aspect of who we are as people. On the back side, it gives us a description of who I am, how I learn, what are my favorites, what are the things that I don't like as a learner. So students study these cards pretty quickly, and then once they've done that, they're in a particular order in terms of the number of attributes from each card that represent that student. From that, we can, as my wife said, learn how a child flies, learn how they think. Let's go to the next slide and look at an actual graphic image of a child's temperament. So we can diagram it. We can plot the strength of each of those 4 aspects of us. It's a beautiful way to graphically show all 4 parts of the person. There are many temperament sorters out there that I've studied, and they're helpful for sure. Like I said, I'm an ENFJ when it comes to the Myers-Briggs. The Dun and Dun or the DISC format or Keirsey and Bates. There are a lot of different temperament sorters out there. But too often they just say, you are this. I'm an ENFJ. Well, wait a second. I'm not just an E, I'm also an I. So I didn't think it was fair. And I wasn't kinesthetic or visual enough for using it with children. So this was developed, and we can graph a child's kite and try to understand how they think. So a child, in this particular case that you're seeing on the screen, a dominant red kite. So what does red mean? Each of those colors have a question attached. So if we start from the heart question is who? Go ahead and click. The next is body. The questions there are where and how. The yellow questions or the mind are what and when, and the soul is why. So this particular student first thinks about where and how. Then they think about why, and then they think who, and then they think what and when. Now, in my experience as an educator, I've worked with many, many, many reluctant learners. Often reluctant learners have that kind of a kite. They want to know why, and they want to know where and how they can do it differently. They don't want to do what I'm told to do and when I'm told to do it, and they care a little bit less about who. So it can cause us some anxiety as a learner and as a parent or teacher when our children's kite doesn't conform to our expectations. But this is the natural temperament of this child. This is how they think. And if we don't affirm it, we're going to cause a reluctant attitude or disposition about learning. So this allows us to honor and affirm the natural tendencies of that child's personality. And almost any personality sorter can help us do this. But we need to affirm this. We need to affirm that children think in a way that may be very different than yours. As Lynn said, I've got a batch of kids, and every one of my kids are totally different people, raised by the same mom and dad in the same home, basically under the same conditions, and each of them are totally different people. They think differently. They handle life situations from different angles. So my son that's a firefighter is very kinesthetic, and he's very people-oriented. My son Ben, who's in law school, he's very minded, very why and very what and when. So we have to respect that. And by respecting that, we can help to nurture a disposition to want to learn more. And maybe more importantly, probably most important, is the child starts to understand who they are as learners. And they can respect the learning style, the learning modality, the learning personality of their friends and their family, because there's a new appreciation. It's no longer competitive, it's cooperative. It's how do we fly together? How do we get a job done using the multiple ways that we think and learn? Not just my way's the right way. I want to know why. Well, what if your partner next to you is saying, hey, I need to know what and when? Then we can create conflict if we don't have an appreciation for that. I want to show you a few kites from a few of the kids in the school. So go ahead and let's show the screen so we can see this a little more clearly. So here's a child. This is Mara, and this kite absolutely is a what-when thinker. This child is so dominant in the what and when. She probably just totally follows the rules, but then wants to know why, and then who. Now, where and how has little significance to her thinking. It's the last thing she's going to think about. So when it comes to kinesthetic learning and using multiple modalities physically, it's not important to her. Following the rules, doing what I'm supposed to do, and understanding why is critical to her. How about another one? This is Abilene. Abilene has the very traditional educator kite. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do, when I'm supposed to do it, and I'm going to get along with people. So the what and the when and the who are first on her mind. This is the student that becomes that model student, just doing what I'm supposed to do, when I'm supposed to do it, and who. Little concern with why and the where and the how. This is unfortunately, our traditional educators are dominated by this kite. And it's great, but what about these? What about the other thinkers, the why and the where and the how thinkers? If we don't appreciate that other kind of thinking, again, we're going to change their disposition to learn to be a more reluctant learner. Here's one more. This one's cool because this one is a little more, we'll call it balanced. It's more of a square kite. I find this in a lot of kindergartners because when kindergartners take the survey, they tend to want to be everything. They want to, I'm this and I'm this and I'm this. They're just very idealistic and open-minded. And as they get older, their kite tends to take more shape. So this is a balanced kite where a child is going to be thinking about all four of those sets of questions. The challenge with it is it's hard to make a decision because you have so many different perspectives you're trying to wrangle as you're making a decision. So a child's kite, a child's personality has everything to do with how they handle a learning task. Everything to do with it. And we know that as parents and teachers. We know that our kids handle situations very differently depending on their personality. So by affirming their personality, you are going to have a trust to let them stretch. And last thing about this, if we use their strengths to stretch their struggle, we're likely to stretch the struggle. So if I use that child's green or red thinking to get them to think more yellow, if you will, they're going to stretch because they're using their strength to stretch the struggle. Hope that makes some sense. So that's personality and temperament. We all have them. There are many different ways to understand them, but essentially this model of 4 different areas that goes back 2,000 years to Hippocrates. Most of the temperament sorters are classifying our temperament into 4 separate thinking styles. All right, thoughts or questions there, and we'll move on to the next element. I'm just going to check my time. Okay, intelligence. Intelligence, personality, and modalities all kind of work together. They are uniquely different, but they are working together and have a lot of overlap. So Howard Gardner gave us the theory of multiple intelligences, well, back in the 70s or 80s. He's still working in Harvard and helping us to understand how people are smart. So this theory, if we go to the next slide, we're just trying to, I'm sorry, stay there. We're flipping. Sorry, let me read that one more time. Go back to that slide. Intelligence, what we want to do, we want to flip another paradigm. We've got to stop asking kids, how smart are you? We need to be asking kids, how are you smart? So we flip the paradigm from how smart I am to how I am smart. And the next slide will illustrate how kids are smart, or how we are all smart. Go ahead. So multiple intelligence theory, and I plugged this theory into these 4 areas, and it matched beautifully. So if you would click along with me, we're going to look at the blue first, and the blue intelligences include, go ahead and click. There they are. Interpersonal and naturalist intelligences. So that's people smart and plant and animal smart. It's about relationships. The red intelligences are kinesthetic and visual spatial. It's that body, physical, hands-on, visual spatial thinking. The yellow intelligences include linguistic and logical mathematical, word smart and number smart, our traditional school smarts. And then finally, our soul smarts are musical and intrapersonal. I think about my thinking. I use a lot of metacognition. I'm asking why. Why is it this way or that way? So our intelligences, and using, I've seen so many different intelligence sorters out there online now. There's some that do all of the scoring for you, which is nice. There are some you can just print out and have kids answer 25, 30 questions, and then you score that and you can get their intelligence, their dominant intelligences. So pretty clever, very insightful, because now we're talking about how you're smart, not how smart you are. And every one of us are smart. And we usually are dominant smart in 2 or 3 different intelligences, not just one. And then we usually struggle in a couple of 3 intelligences that aren't easy for us. So again, that idea of how you're smart versus how smart you are is the message we're trying to get to kids to change their disposition. If I believe I'm smart and I know how I'm smart, what can't I learn? If I know I'm a visual kinesthetic learner, well, I'm going to learn by doing it. One of my sons is dominant that way. But if I'm a soulful learner and an intrapersonal thinker, I need some time to myself. I need to contemplate these ideas on my own and not always be in a lecture mode or be in an audience trying to learn something. So understanding that is going to give you so much more clear insight as to your child's learning ability. All right, so that's affirming. Let me just touch on stretching. You see a slide in front of you, and I'm asking the question, how many squares do you see? And most of us will look at it pretty quickly and find 16. Just do the math, there it is, 16. But I'm sure one of you have already said, no, there's 17. So if you click the slide again, you look at that outside box, and there's 17 squares. Very good, there's 17. Now, some of you out there are saying, no, there are more. And you start counting the 2x2s. Go ahead and click. And there are 9 2x2s. So now we're at 24 squares. And one more, actually 2 more. If we look at the 3x3s, there's 4 of those. So there's 30 squares. 30 squares where we thought originally there were only 16. Now, I even had a very green thinking student, a Y thinking student say, no, Mr. B, there's 31. So where'd you get the 31? I haven't counted that one. Said, Mr. B, the word squares is up there. So That's brilliant and beautiful, because that's what we're after. We're trying to help kids understand you are more than 16 squares. Every one of us have brains that are beyond the capacity that we think they are, and influencing their disposition to learn, helping them to understand how they're smart, and not just with fluffy, glittering generalities. Oh, you're so smart. No, you're smart because you can take that puzzle, you can put it together, take it apart, manipulate it. You can read a passage and you can understand the words. You can read difficult vocabulary. You can do mathematical equations. You're great with people. You're an incredible dancer. You're an incredible musician. Those are intelligences. Our society wants those intelligences. That's what makes them smart, is because it gives us joy in life. It gives us new understanding and creativity. So there are 8 different ways that we're smart, not just 2. And to stretch them, we need to help them to understand how they are smart. All right, let me go back to that affirm, stretch, and celebrate idea, just to get that back in our brain and remind ourselves that if we're going to change a child's disposition to learn, these 3 steps are dramatic and effective. If nothing else is remembered today, I hope you remember affirm, stretch, and celebrate. Affirm children for their strengths and struggles. Stretch them with compassion, kindness, and persistence, and not let them off the hook because they trust you. And then you got to give them a high five. You got to have cake. You got to celebrate. All right, last thought I think from me is I'm going to just repeat a quote that we shared the last time we met. And all we did was we raised our level of consciousness. I hope you're more conscious about who you are as a learner, that you maybe understand your modality a little bit better. Maybe you understand the kind of questions you like to ask, and that's your temperament. And you know what you're good at. What we're good at, we're joyful about. Things we're not good at, we're probably not so intelligent about. So understanding that about yourself raises your level of consciousness and improves your art of life. But understanding somebody else's as a teacher or as a parent will improve the art of living. Very good. Thank you very much. That's, that went by quick. Always does, doesn't it? I guess I have one last thing to say on the takeaways, but any direction right now, Lynn, from your end?
Yeah, so we are, and I knew this was going to happen, Bob. We're getting pouring questions. Questions are pouring in about the cards, the deck of temperament cards, where they can get it. And just so everyone knows, we will share the resources that you are sharing with us in this webinar. And the other thing that comes to my mind, I may have shared this story with you, Bob, in the past, but it's so interesting when you hear things like this, and then you look at your children and how different they learn. And a comment my son made just last week, they're studying geography. This is my oldest son, he's 10. And he said he didn't do very good on his geography test. And he said, "Mom, I guess I must be stupid then." And he is a brilliant boy. He is so good at memorizing things. He's extremely good at spelling. So they were learning all the states and the capitals. And he, I guess, is not very much a visual learner, because he got a few of them wrong on the East Coast. And although he connected the capitals and the states, he had them placed wrong on the map, which gave him a very bad score. And he was so upset with himself. And I had such a hard time getting him to understand, you did a great job, you just messed up. You know, we have to work on where they are on the map, and then you're good, you have 100%. And he was so hard on himself.
There it is. There's his disposition, right? Exactly, disposition. My attitude and perception about who I am as a learner. But if he recognizes that he's probably a dominant auditory learner, and now we're going to stretch his visual learning by using visuals along with the auditory, then he's going to gain that. He's going to use the occipital lobe of his brain, and he's going to connect the 2 lobes of the brain and get a stronger neural pathway, and now have 2 references to the learning, not just 1. And if we can tie all modalities together, then we're just using more and more of our brain. We're using those 100 billion neurons in a much more networked way.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Here's actually a question. This is a great question. Someone is asking to give a couple of anecdotal samples, maybe one of a great success story and one that was not a success story. That might be an ongoing situation.
Okay. Gosh, I'm filled with them every day. I'm looking for something, some context that you're looking for about a child's disposition. Well, I'm a counselor as well as a principal. I have a PPS credential, and I spend a lot of time counseling kids. So I'll think about, well, a boy who's super quiet. He's just super, super quiet. He's an introvert, but he's a contortionist. So he's physically just an amazing contortionist. And he made a mistake this week, and it was really, really hard for him to come to the principal's office and get counsel. But when he came into the room, I used a little bit of humor, because that's what his contortionist stuff is all about, is making people laugh. And I was able to get him to calm down. I got him to go from the limbic system and the concern that he was having, the emotional stress, to think. I used humor. We found humor, which helped him to get to here, and then we could dialogue and talk about what was going on in that situation. So it's tuning in. You know, we have to tune into a child, and the more we understand the child, the better. It's easier. I knew this child, and I knew what his temperament and his personality was like, so I was able to use that in order to get him to do the cognitive work of problem solving. But if they're stuck here, you can't do this. So that's where our disposition is that connection. Now I'm smart, I can figure this out. I hope that helps. I'm just off the cuff thinking about something that just happened yesterday. Does that help? I could go on all day long, I think, telling stories.
No, I think that's great. I think you know, people are just trying to put all these concepts into place with you know, this is how our audience is learning. They need samples.
That's right. Yeah. Is there another one? I'll give another 2 or 3 if that's helpful.
No, I think more is about, you know, the recording. And if you actually, this could be a good question for you. Is this an appropriate recording to share with the kids at school, or is it more geared toward?
We teach it here all the time. And again, we teach it from kindergartners. I teach it to university students. I think this is essential. If you're a parent or an educator, well, frankly, temperament sorting came from business. They realized that we better understand our employees and understand the gifts that they have and the struggles that they have, because we need to synergize. We need a team that can have multiple ideas, multiple ways of thinking in order to create a great product or service. So this is for all of us. This helps our families, this helps our schools, this helps individual students not be reluctant and have a positive disposition about learning and living their daily life. We feel better when we understand each other. I feel better about the things I'm dumb at, the things I struggle with. That's me. I'm not good at it, and I feel okay about it. But then I'm going to make sure that I have somebody nearby that can help me take care of those things. So when we hire people here, we try to get multiple kite styles into our team, so we have that broader picture of how to operate a school.
Thanks, Bob. And we are actually getting some questions about Parent Square. I know I think we have a couple of slides added at the end about Parent Square. I know you use Parent Square, and you have for many, many years. I know you share a lot of this information with your families via Parent Square. If anyone wants to learn more about how Parent Square helps schools communicate and collaborate, you can contact us. Bob, maybe you want to share a little bit on how you use Parent Square, maybe to help with some of these.
You know, I've been a teacher, a counselor, and a principal for many years, and a dad. My daughter, one of my daughters, my young daughter, comes to school here. We use Parent Square every single day, multiple times a day, for so many different things. Whether I'm trying to send a private message to 5 parents, whether I'm trying to get volunteers to help with something that's going on campus. Last night we had a strategic planning meeting, and we coordinated all of the materials through Parent Square and the invitations. There's just so many different ways to use it. My favorite way to use it, though, is to share these kinds of ideas with our parents through a weekly post. So every week, every Monday, I share these concepts. Parent Square just put together a nice template for people to use. Actually, I think there's three or five templates for different ways to post newsletters. So it just makes it so much easier for the teachers to format it and make it look sharp. So there's so many different ways. Emergencies. We had a drill. That wasn't even a drill. A fire alarm got pulled, and I used Parent Square within 15 minutes after the drill to alert all of the parents of what just happened, so that they're not panicking, and that they can communicate back to me by appreciating the post, which means they read it, and if they have questions, they can comment very quickly. So on our computers, on our phones, on our smartwatches, we can get notifications that are just within our family at our school, our parents and our teachers. So there are so many ways.
Thank you, Bob. And many are also asking about how to get a certificate, and I just sent out a notice to all with instructions, so you can write to zarina@parentsquare.com. It's in the chat box. If you're interested in getting a certificate for this webinar.